My NDE was on August 22nd, 2008. It happened at 1:20 p.m. I was in the emergency room. And earlier, much earlier that morning, I woke up with excruciating pain and I was burning up with a fever. We now know it was 106 degrees, but I was covered still with all the blankets on the bed. And I wanted to push the blankets off because I was so hot, but I was in so much pain, I wasn't able to move my body.
I'm here today with Jane Thompson, who has had a profound near-death experience and now is spending her life compassionately helping and healing others.
I wanted to push the blankets off because I was so hot, but I was in so much pain, I wasn't able to move my body. And it's the type of pain that you get when you have the flu, where you have those all over body aches, but it was like 10,000 times worse than that. And so while I was lying in bed, I was in and out of being awake or in and out of consciousness. And I knew that quite a bit of time had gone by because when I first woke up, it was still a little dark in my room. And every time I came to, it was getting brighter and brighter. So I knew time was going by. And I finally was able to move my body enough where I was able to get my cell phone that was on the table next to my bed. And I called a family member and I said, I'm in the worst pain I've ever been in my life. I don't know what's wrong with me. I need to get in to see a doctor. And so she said that she would come and pick me up. And we went straight to the hospital rather than the doctor's office. It was when she saw me, she knew this was not a regular trip to the primary care guy. So we went to one hospital. They weren't able to figure out what was going on there. So they sent me to an emergency room in a different hospital. And this was some time that had gone by, and I was feeling worse and worse. And I could feel, that was when I began to understand the difference between feeling really sick and feeling like I'm dying. Because now looking back, I can see where I started going into this is a really bad illness into my body is beginning to shut down. And when I got to that emergency room, they took me in a wheelchair and they placed me on a gurney. I was waiting for a CT scan, and everything was so amplified around me. People talking. I remember I could hear vividly the second hand of the clock ticking that was on the wall right next to me, and the lights were very bright, and everything was so loud that I remember feeling really kind of irritated internally. It was just too much. And then they took me in for the CT scan. I don't remember anything that happened during the CT scan. I remember coming out and they took me on the gurney to the area of the emergency room where I was waiting for them to come and tell me what was wrong and what the next steps were. And it was at that point that I really felt myself truly beginning to fully leave my body. I Everything was still amplified, but I was becoming more and more disconnected from it. And I was burning up still with that fever of 106 degrees, still in excruciating pain. And I was burning up, but freezing cold all at the same time. And right at that moment, I started convulsing. And it felt like violent convulsing. I could feel my whole body shaking and my head hurt. I could feel the veins on my head popping out. And I had this thought to myself of, I don't know how much more of this I can take. I don't know how much more of this pain my body can take. And it was right at that moment that the pain instantly went away. I didn't feel any more pain. And I popped out of my body, and I was at that point up on the ceiling of the room in the hospital that I was in, looking down at myself.
This holiday season, give yourself the gift of community, connection, and healing by joining Love Covered Life Sanctuary, a safe, nurturing space to support your spiritual journey. Here's what you'll experience: a supportive community with forums and chats to share and connect, a December Acts of Kindness challenge to bring more love into the world, monthly live calls with me for Q&A, deep connection, and spiritual coaching, monthly live events with expert guests to inspire and guide you, always available on replay, and when you join, you get to put in requests for the guests that you want to connect with. After listening to your feedback, I've made this more accessible than ever. I've converted to a pay what you can system, and the lowest tier is only $2.50 a month. This is your moment to invest in you. Step into the new year with support, love, and a spiritual community by your side. Click here to join or check the description box. I can't wait to get to know you and take this journey with you.
On the hospital gurney at my body, and the people around me and the machines all around me. And I was very disoriented at first because I remember feeling like, how am I up here, but I see myself down there? And the more that I had some time to orient to what was happening, I could see that what looked like me, my body, it was just the shell of me. I could tell that there was no life in that body anymore. And I felt fully present up on the ceiling up above me. It felt like me up there. And I was just observing. I wasn't scared at all. I I really didn't have a lot of emotion about what was going on. I was just observing and taking it all in and truly getting oriented to being out of my body and not in the physical world in the way that I had been used to being in it for 34 years. I was 34 when I had my NDE. It was right at that point that I very slowly started floating backwards and up. So the scene that I was looking at was becoming further and further away. Everything was getting smaller. And then I just started seeing what I thought was just the hospital, just the walls of the hospital, and then just the roof. And then all of that disappeared. Anything that was man-made disappeared at that point. And that's when I noticed what I was seeing were these little balls of white light moving around. Some were bouncing around, and they were all connected by a very thin, iridescent line. The way that it looks when you catch a spider web just right in the sunlight. That's what the lines looked like. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I now know that that's oneness. And I could see that it was the way that all these white balls that I knew were souls were connected together. And I was just observing that and taking it in. And I was noticing that some of the souls, some of the white balls of energy were really buzzing and bouncing around, while others were moving, I guess, in a more calm way. And I remember the buzzing, bouncing ones, I remember thinking to myself, they're all just kind of running around like chickens with their heads cut off, is what I thought from my perspective. And it didn't make sense to me. There was no judgment about it, but all that busyness and buzzing didn't make sense to me from where I was at in that point. And then I continued to float backwards. And then I was in all black just for a moment. I guess it would be maybe what you would feel like outer space might look like, but there were no lights. I now feel like that was maybe what we refer to as the void. And I wasn't scared, but I was a little cautious about it. I do get the feeling that maybe if I had stayed in the void for longer, I wouldn't have liked the way that felt. But right at that moment, I immediately went backwards into a tunnel. And it was all black, not scary at all. And I was moving very fast at this point. It felt like pedal to the metal fast, but it was fun. And it was really exhilarating and it was kind of exciting with that anticipation of, I wonder where this is taking me. And it was that feeling where, if you're on a roller coaster and you're having so much fun, you kind of throw your hands up in the air and scream. It was that type of exhilarating in the tunnel. And then right after the tunnel, I immediately dropped out into this bright, beautiful white light. And going from this really dark tunnel into this bright, calm, peaceful light took me a minute there to orient. And once I adjusted, the next thing I felt was this beautiful hug of white light love. It's the best love that you can ever imagine. If you can think of someone or something that you've loved more than anything in your life, it's the love that I felt in that light is even more powerful, more profound, more pure than that. And I felt all this love all around me and all through me. And I was soaking it in. It felt so good. And the next thing I felt after that was this overwhelming sense of peace, peace like I've never felt before, the kind of peace where if someone tells you everything's going to be okay or all is well and you really believe them, it just washes over you. And it was just a knowing that everything is okay. And at that moment, although I was a part of that loving white light, I still had my own unique vibration, I guess you could say, or energy. I could feel my soul as a part of the white light, but also as me, as distinctly me. And I looked down, even though I was not, I didn't have a physical body. I could feel my attention being directed down. And I noticed all these holes in my soul or my energetic space. It was almost like looking at a clear bubble, but pieces of it were missing. And I could see that those holes were being filled in. And they were being filled in with that love that I was experiencing and with that peace that I was experiencing. And I was being made whole again. I was getting a profound healing, is what I was getting. And I was brought back to oneness. Those holes, it was trauma, it was emotional pain, physical pain, everything that I had picked up along the way from my earth life that hurt was being healed while I was in that white light. And I felt this sense of, oh, this is what it feels like to be me. This is what it feels like to be whole and who I've always been at my core and who my true self is really. And right at that moment, I got this sense of feeling very seen. I knew I was being seen for all of me, for every minute of life that I had ever lived or lifetimes that I've ever lived. And everything good, not good, and everything in between that I had ever done. I was just seen. And that was very healing, very seen, very accepted for all of the parts of me, all of the experiences that I had been through, and just loved for everything that I am and that I was in that moment. And I was really enjoying this, really taking it all in. I was feeling very replenished. I was feeling like I was getting my energy back. I was feeling vibrant. And then I noticed, and this was just for a brief second, so I don't have a very good description of this because it was so brief, but I then noticed what I thought were other souls coming in around me. It felt like a crowd of people that I was familiar with. I'm guessing it was maybe loved ones that have passed on were coming to get me or coming to greet me or coming to help me. But I didn't have enough time to understand what that was because right at that moment, I heard this inaudible voice say, "You need to go back." And I was blindsided by that because I felt like, oh, I'm finally home. This is a place I never want to leave. And then hearing you need to go back, that's not what I wanted to hear. And so I protested. I said, no, 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 please don't make me go back. And then again, I heard the voice. It was firm but gentle, say, you need to go back. And it was in a way where I knew this was not a negotiation. I'm going back. I'm going back to my body, back into the physical world. And right at that moment, I felt a little bit of a nudge back into the tunnel. And I went backwards through the tunnel very quickly. And then the next thing I knew, I was sucked into my body through the top of my head. I felt the pain return just for a split second. It was just enough for me to know, okay, I'm back. I'm back in my body. I'm not in the light anymore. I'm back in this world. And then I completely blacked out until much later that evening when I was in pre-op getting ready for surgery. And what had happened was I had a kidney stone that had become lodged in my ureter. I didn't know I had the stone, but as it was trying to leave my kidney, it got stuck in my ureter. And so all of the toxins that your kidney typically filters out was getting pushed back into my body. And so my entire blood supply had become infected and I had gone into septic shock. And that was the reason for my NDE.
Jane, thank you so much for sharing. I would love to ask you a couple questions about your near-death experience. As you may have noticed, I've recently expanded my podcast niche to include not only profound spiritual experiences, but anything and everything that could contribute towards the healing of humanity and the planet, including but not limited to bioenergetic medicine, quantum health, regenerative agriculture, sustainability, conscious parenting. As I've made this transition, I've experienced a significant drop in views on the podcast because the algorithm is confused by the change. In order to keep this podcast running, it would mean so much to me if you could help me show the algorithm that this is the content you want. If you love this video, could you help me out by A, subscribing if you haven't, leaving a comment, and sharing this video with others who would enjoy it. Let's make an impact on the healing of this planet together. It takes all of us to make this happen. Thank you so much for your support.
Okay.
When you mentioned that you saw the little spheres, I don't remember the exact word you used, but they were connected by the cord, like the cord or web of light. And you said some of them were bouncing around and some of them were calm. Do you know why that is?
Yes. And I love that question, Melissa, because you're the first person who's ever picked up on that in an interview.
Oh,
And
really?
so, yeah, you are. And I think I say that about the buzzing around in most interviews, but I love that you picked up on that because it's important. It's, I mean, it's humanness. It's some people are more zenned out than others, and some are, you know, maybe even completely dissociated from their bodies. I suspect, now that I've done so much healing work, what I suspect what I was seeing is regulated nervous systems versus dysregulated nervous
Mm.
systems of, this person's feeling the calm person, the calm, less frantic, buzzing ball of energy is feeling pretty safe, pretty centered. And then maybe the ones that I thought were running around like chickens with their heads cut off, which we all do it. We're human. Probably the ones that were maybe a little more triggered, or just the nervous system was dysregulated, or maybe they had one too many cups of coffee that day. That happens too. But there was a distinct difference. And it's so interesting when I really reflect on my NDE, there are specific points during it where it was almost like somebody said to me, make sure you're paying attention to this. This is
Mm.
important for certain parts of it to stand out and to be so specific. And, here I am, what is it, 15 years later after my NDE, and you're just now asking me that question. It's
Mhm.
like that is just now meant to be discussed or talked about, or for me to think about more deeply. And it's because that's what's ready to be healed kind of for the collective
Mm.
right now. But I love that question. And so it could have been any number of things, but I will tell you, as I was taking the scene in, the calmer souls look like they were having a little bit better time at life.
Ah.
They just seemed almost like they were maybe more in their true self space.
Mhm. So the way that you're describing it sounds like these were souls that were embodied or were they souls on the other side?
Those were definitely souls that were embodied, that
Mm.
were in the hospital and maybe even
Mm.
beyond outside. But yeah, those were definitely embodied souls at that point that I was seeing.
Okay, and that's fascinating that you saw that web of connection between embodied souls.
Yes. And prior to my NDE, oneness, connectedness was not a part of my not my knowledge base. It was not a thing that I knew about or talked about. And so to see it that way so profoundly, it was, it's very validating now to know that I knew nothing about that then.
Hmm,
And to be able to talk about it now and say, yes, oneness was existing when I didn't even believe or know about oneness.
that's fascinating. I love that. The reason why I asked that question is because I read Michael Newton's books several years ago now, a long time ago. And that was one thing that I noticed from that book is when he would describe souls in between incarnations that they would have different personalities and some of them would be more bouncing around and excited and maybe like I don't know if immature is the best word, but maybe like younger without as much experience and just excited to go to their lives on Earth. And then others would be more experienced and calmer. And I just thought that was interesting that he pointed out that we still have a personality or, different aspects to our soul that we've developed when we're on the other side. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I 100% agree with that. And I think whether you're like for me, looking at an embodied soul or someone who has already transitioned out of the physical world, personality is still definitely there. And even though we are all connected and we are all that white light, we're still distinct. We've all had experiences and we all have these little energetic imprints on us. And it does create a distinct personality. And I like what you said about some being more excited. And because I want to make the distinction between what I was looking at in the hospital with the really buzzy, bouncing around souls, those souls appeared to have needed more healing.
Mm,
So I think there was a distinct difference between kind of a younger soul, or
mhm.
even it could be an older soul who has more of that childlike wonder to their
Right.
personalities.
Right.
Yeah. And so, yes, I agree with what he's written about in his books and what you're saying, that there is personality. And I think when we've transitioned out of our bodies, and the healing really takes place, like that healing that I got in the light, that's when you get to see kind of the true personality, the true self, the original blueprint of the person before all the things happened to us in life.
I love that. So you mentioned when you came back into your body, you did not want to come, and then it was kind of more a situation where you were just told this is going to happen. A question that a lot of people have is, do we have a choice in coming to these lives on Earth?
I think we do. And I'm sure that somewhere at some boardroom meeting before I came into this current life, I knew I was going to have an NDE and I knew I was going to be sent back, and I still protested it anyway. So yeah, I do think that we are a part of the planning for our souls and our lives. That doesn't mean we always go along with it though. we
Right.
can we can bring a lot of resistance in, and it's we definitely do that in our bodies, but even think about me out of my body completely, where there was no ego, no mental chatter interference, and I still protested it. And so maybe that says something about the personality of my soul too, of no, I just want to be here, and I
Mm.
am one to kind of speak up a little bit more. And so I do believe that we have a choice. I think that there's the choices that we've made that our humanness doesn't agree with. There's still a lot of wisdom there, and in some ways we have to find really the strength to trust the wisdom of our souls and of our higher selves and what we have laid out for ourselves, even though it may not be what we want in that moment.
Right. This is a question that gets asked a lot, but I do ask almost all of my guests this. Why are we here? Were you given any information on why we're living these lives on Earth?
I did not realize I was receiving the information while I was on the other side. But when I came back into my body and into the physical world, and when I recovered from my illness, I just had this knowing that we are here to love, and we are here to heal, and we are here to grow. And I think most near death experiencers come back with a similar lesson or knowing. And so we are here to love, we are here for connection, and we are here to heal our traumas and to learn from our woundings, and to use that learning and that healing to make the world a better place. And it could be on a, grand global scale. It could be a conversation that you have with your next door neighbor about personal healing work that you've done. And I say this because when I was in the light, I got that full healing. I mean, I was healed 100%. But as soon as I came back, it was like all the baggage I left at the door when I went into the light, it was still waiting there for me to pick back up. And so, although I had that healing for my soul in this world, in the physical world on planet Earth, we still have the density of it. And it's still there, even when you've had a profound healing, it is still there to heal on a physical level. So then we can go out and help and love others because of that healing that we've done.
I've heard you speak on previous podcasts about how when you came back, you had a heightened sensitivity. And is that something that you would like to share about?
Yeah, well, I don't remember much until the next morning after my NDE, but I woke up in a hospital room and I was in and out of consciousness, but I was definitely more with it than I had been the day before. And nurses or the doctor, as they were walking in and out of the room, it was like I could feel what they were feeling or sense what they were feeling. And because I was on a lot of pain medication, it was kind of a trippy feeling of, am I feeling that? I couldn't make sense of it. Am I feeling it? Am I making it up? But I knew that I was sensing more than I had prior to that. Before, I really never felt anything outside of my own body. But then after I had more surgeries and really recovered from the illness, that's when I really started noticing the sensitivities. When I would go to the grocery store or even, the home that I lived in, my mailbox was right at the front door. So the mailman would always come to the front door. And I always knew what he was feeling. Or he and I would stand there and talk sometimes. And he would say something to me and I'd think, I don't think that's true. Not that he was lying. I just thought, I don't think he's not disclosing what he's really thinking or feeling right now. And then when I would go to the grocery store, that I remember one specific example of being at the grocery store. It was so busy. And I felt like I could hear all this chatter around me, even from the other aisles, not just the aisle that I was on. It was like I could hear all the conversations, and it was just noisy. And I was there at a time of day where everybody was shopping right after work. So everybody's a little more busy and running around. And I felt myself getting stirred up. I could feel how busy and unsettled everyone else was. And I felt it making me feel that way too. And I remember going home after that, just feeling exhausted. I was completely wiped out and drained. And that's when I started exploring more of really what it means to be an empath, because I was not an empath prior to my NDE. And so I started understanding more about being sensitive to other people's energies, or even the energy of a building or the energy of an animal. And that's when I started understanding I'm intuitively picking up on all of this. I'm feeling this with my intuition, with my sensitive soul. And then, being right out of the light, I was particularly vulnerable. And I was picking up on a lot more at that time because of that. I didn't understand about protection and, protecting your energy. And even these days, I won't go to the grocery store right after everybody got off of work. I just know, why would I do that to myself? It's too much for me to manage. So I'm just as sensitive now as I was then, but I have a lot of skills and tools to kind of rein it in when it gets to be too much.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Would you be interested in sharing what some of those skills and tools are that you've developed? Because the reason why I ask is I think that a lot of people who tune into this channel probably do have higher sensitivity, like higher spiritual sensitivities, or experience sensory overload, and it might be helpful.
I think the first most important thing to do when you feel that overload, when you feel like you're being drained, when something just doesn't feel right and you're starting to feel tired, the first most important thing is to ask yourself this question and let your intuition answer. is what I'm feeling mine or someone else's? And you will know. And sometimes it's, well, it's 80% mine, 20% someone else's. And if you know that it's yours, that's when you can take steps to calm yourself, with a breathing exercise, or maybe you need a nap, or maybe you need a shower, anything to restore your own energy. But when you get that feeling of this isn't mine, 20% of it isn't, or I don't think 100% of it is. I know how basic this sounds, but it works powerfully, is to take the 20% or, take whatever the amount is. I place it on my hand and then I picture like a box of white light and I place it in there. And then I just, with my mind's eye, I lovingly hand it back to the higher self of the person that it belongs to. And I say, this isn't mine, this is yours to take care of. And then that's that. And, it's important to do it lovingly. And for me, because I work so much with the light, with healing work, putting it in that box of white light is kind of, it's not like saying, here's your junk, take it away from me. It's saying, I see there's some stuff here that needs some healing and here. And I know that sounds too simple, but when we're talking about things like this, the more complicated we make it, the more complicated it becomes. And so stick with the simple practices. Another great one is when you're in the shower, picture or, whatever your clair is, notice, feel, or just set the intention of anything that's not mine, this water is going to wash off and down the drain. That's a very powerful practice to do once a day, too. There are a lot that you can try because different personalities, different things will work for different people. But the best advice I can give is keep it simple. Because if we're out of that place of simple when we're talking about the soul, when we're talking about energy, this got a little too involved. And then that's where things can get confusing and counterproductive, really.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing. When you had your near-death experience, did you know what it was? Were you familiar with the phenomenon of near-death experiences?
I had heard of near-death experiences, and I had heard of people going into the light, but I know this sounds silly now. I didn't realize they were the same thing. I thought a near-death experience was you almost drown,
Mm.
which could be a near-death experience, but I thought it was just like a brush with death. And then I thought the only people that had this experience of going into the light were the people who had flatlined and then were resuscitated, which is what happened to me. But at that time, I didn't know that if you had drowned or almost drowned, you could still go into the light, even if you didn't flatline. I had none of that knowledge. And I knew that I had died. I knew that I had gone into the light that loved me and healed me. I knew that I was a totally different person when I came back, but it honestly took me about 3 years before I knew that was called a near-death experience. Because back then, I mean, there weren't these YouTube channels like yours. And the most recent book that had come out, I think it was only maybe at that time less than 20 years old. I mean, studying NDEs was fairly new. So no, I didn't know that it was called a near-death experience. And when I finally figured it out, it was it was kind of like, well, duh. Yeah, that's what happened, but I didn't know to give it that name. I just was telling myself I died and I went into the light and I came back. That was all I knew at that point.
Right. So that seems like it would have been a lot to deal with. First of all, healing from the physical condition that caused the experience, having the near-death experience, having to come back And then dealing with the heightened sensitivities on top of all of that. What was that journey like for you managing all of that?
That was definitely what I would say was a dark night of the soul period in my life. When I first came back, I was pretty sick for about 3 months after that, where I was not working and I was at home. I was in and out of the hospital for surgeries, but I was mostly at home. And when I was at home, I was expected to be on the couch or in bed because I didn't have anything more than that to give. And that was kind of I think now that that time was a gift because that was a time for me to really reflect. I mean, I was revisiting the light quite a bit when I was in bed or on the couch and just kind of letting it sink in of, did that really happen? Yes, it did. And just how extraordinary and how profound and powerful it was. And I had a lot of quiet time to sit with it. But then once I started feeling better physically, I wanted to talk about it. I really needed to talk about it because it was so internal at that point. And I tried to talk with a couple of family members. I tried to talk with someone else that I was very close with. They did not want to hear it. And they didn't say they didn't believe me, but they did not want to hear it. I was better. I wasn't dead. And they did not want to hear anything about death. I tried to talk with my doctor about it. That was a mistake.
Oh no.
He laughed at me, and I can still see his face all these years later. That was very damaging. And so, I'm feeling better. I'm in this place where I really need to talk about what happened so I can process it and understand it. I didn't have anybody to talk to. And I'm having all of these sensitivities that I don't understand what they mean. I knew nothing about how to manage them. And I wanted to go talk to a therapist, but I thought, wow, if I got in with maybe any therapist, they might really think this is some wacky stuff that I'm saying. So I really just kept to myself. I stayed at home a lot. I was home a lot. I only went in for work when I absolutely had to. I worked mostly from home. It got to the point where I had my groceries delivered, which these days is not that unusual. But back then, to get your groceries delivered, that was not the norm. And I was just very isolated. I lost a lot of relationships because I didn't know what was happening to me. They didn't know what was happening to me. I wasn't going out and connecting. I was just home. And that went on, I would say, for maybe 9 months after I fully recovered from the physical illness. And then we had this really big snowstorm, the kind where you can't leave the house. And so the whole city that I was in was very, very quiet and everybody was home. And I think that gave me a little bit of a break to calm down my energy enough where I got on Google and I just started Googling some of the weird things that were happening to me. And I don't know if I thought I was going to find like a group that I could join. I don't know what I thought I was going to find, but I'm so glad that I was Googling because the two things that I Googled were after you die, why do you break watches or something like that? I couldn't wear watches anymore. They would break on me. Or after you die, why don't automatic doors see you? Because when I would go to like where I live, they had like Target and Best Buy where the doors detect you and then they open. They didn't see me. And so I would always wait for somebody to walk in and then I'd catch the open door after them, or I'd just use the regular door. But I started Googling all the weird stuff that was happening to me to try to make sense of it. And I came across the International Association of Near-Death Studies website, and they had the list of after effects after an NDE. And I mean, I was going down the list and it was like I was checking every box. And so I really poured over their website. And that's when I learned that I had a near-death experience. This is what it is. This is what happens or can happen. This is what life looks like afterwards. And here's how you can get some help. And that's when I finally felt some hope. And that dark night of the soul probably went on for another year after that because it was a lot of hard work to manage the after effects. And I realized that I had picked a lot of my baggage back up and, the trauma baggage, and I needed to heal a lot of that before I was ready to kind of really go out and start making some new friends and start figuring the world out again, how to exist in the world as post NDE me, because I knew I wasn't going to get rid of the sensitivities. I knew I wasn't going to get rid of the knowledge that this isn't home, but I knew I was going to live a lot longer. I had more years to go. And so I had to figure out how to be this way in the world. And it took time. It took a lot of time.
Well, thank you so much for coming back and for being here now. And I'd like to switch gears and let you share about the work that you do and where people can find you.
Well, coming out of that difficult period that I was in and doing all of that healing work on myself, I also connected with two really fantastic healers that I learned a lot from. And so I do intuitive energy healing work now. And what you and I had touched on earlier in the interview, where during my NDE, certain things were really pointed out and really specific. When I was getting those holes filled in, I was being shown, it's the difference between when somebody just does something for you versus when somebody shows you how to do something. And I was being shown how to fill that wounding in, how to move energy to fill wounding in, to heal wounding. And so that's essentially what my work is today. I work with people from all over the world who are healing trauma, healing conditioning, programming patterns that we got when we were kids, people that have had spiritual experiences that are in that dark night of the soul and they're trying to get out of it, come onto the other side of that, where they feel like they can participate in the world again, or people who just are sensitive and maybe their spiritual gifts are a little squashed at first, but they're coming back out and they're learning how to manage that and how to work with that. Really, what my work does now is I'm helping everyone get back to their true self. So you don't have to wait until you go into the light to feel what your true self feels like, what your original blueprint of you looks like. It's healing the trauma, doing all of the healing work so you can get as close to your true self here in your body as you can, so you can really fully live out your purpose and really experience the love and the abundance and the joy that we hear about, that we want to experience. And maybe we want it more fully, but it's really just about taking what's happened to us, healing the parts that made things a little cloudy or a little more difficult or caused some wounding, so we can get closer and closer to that true self, authentic self, live a full life type of space.
And would you like to share where the viewers can find you?
Sure. My website is safehandshealing.com. And I've got a lot of different resources there. I've got healing workshops. I do group healings, the first day of each month, and I do one-on-one sessions also. But all my interviews are there. I know sometimes I love when people tell me they like to binge watch
Mm.
NDE interviews. And it's because you're connecting with the light. You're getting, when we're talking about it, you're getting a healing. And so go onto my website and, binge watch them if you want to and get a healing
Mhm.
that way. But I'm here to just to help people heal. And I had such a hard time after my NDE that I really made it a big part of my mission to hopefully try to make it easier for other people when they're really motivated to heal, when they really want to do the work, to make it as easy and as empowering as possible.
Thank you so much, Jane. I will have those links in the description, or I'll have your website link in the description so that people can check it out. Thank you so much for being willing to share your story and for offering your healing gifts to the world.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all that you do to put all of this out there to help people.
Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. I'd like to invite you to subscribe if you loved this video. Your likes, comments, and shares are so appreciated to help boost this video in the algorithm. If you're looking for deeper connection and support, you can join my Pay What You Can online safe haven community space, Love Covered Life Sanctuary, for as little as $2.50 a month. It's the best way to financially support this podcast. You can also shop my paintings and my merch at lovecoveredlife.com. My paintings are my best attempt to put my spiritual, mystical pre-birth memories and experiences into a visual representation so people can experience them along with me. And all of my merch is vegan, cruelty-free, non-toxic, and sustainably produced, using organic materials, renewable energy, and ethical practices. If you're feeling stuck and overwhelmed in life, my course Alchemy is your step-by-step guide to a spiritual awakening into heart-based consciousness and manifesting the life you love. Finally, check out my other YouTube channel, Melissa Denise, where I share my own insights and teachings. And you can also find the audio version of this podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and Apple Music. Be loved, be happy, be at peace, and thank you for watching.